Welcome to Real Health with me, Karl Henry. Folks, why should you make your bed every single morning? How can small routines transform your mental and physical well-being? And why is saying no one of the most powerful skills that you can learn? Well, joining me today to explain is Dr. Dale Whelehan, behavioural scientist and lecturer at UCD's Smurfit Business School of Graduate Business. Dale, welcome. How's it going?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Did you make your bed this morning?
I did, yes. It would be a little bit, controversial if I didn't.
There is a bit of science behind that, isn't there?
Yeah.
In terms of starting the day off on a positive, a win, basically, before kind of anything else kicks off.
Yeah, well, I mean, the brain likes predictability. The brain doesn't like to be stuck in limbo or chaos for any long period of time. So it's constantly striving to create some sense of predictability on a day-to-day basis. And one of the most predictable things you can do when you wake up is to engage in some sort of behavior that allows you to have a sense of control in your life. And putting your bedclothes back into the place from the night before is one of the best ways to start that. Within that, then, when you look at a neuroscientific level, we have a little chemical called dopamine, which is firing the minute we anticipate a reward of completing a task. And so automatically you're starting to fire that dopamine surge early on in the morning through something that's self-initiated.
And it's a little bit of order as well, isn't it? Like a process. It's an order. It's like I wake up, I brush my teeth, I would do whatever, make the bed downstairs. It's part of the order of the day. And order is important from a kind of emotional and mental well-being perspective.
Yeah, definitely. There's a really good behavioural theory called Thinking Fast and Slow, Daniel Kahneman's work, who won a Nobel Peace Prize in behavioral economics. And what he essentially said was the brain has two ways of thinking. There's the automatic, unconscious, intuitive things that we do 99% of the day. We make thousands of decisions every day, unbeknownst to the fact. If we had to consciously make decisions every day, we would be paralyzed by the very thought of it. So oftentimes we are making these sort of decisions, like making our bed, unconsciously because it's become part of routine. The problem is, I suppose, when you actively are trying to become the person who makes your bed in the morning, then it's a conscious process and you have to be very deliberate about doing that. But eventually it moves from a part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex, which is the conscious awareness of doing a task, into a more automatic, repetitive part of the brain where, again, you just do it without thinking about it.
And is that 28 days to change a habit kind of thing? Is there a time frame on that we can say to people, listen, do it for 4 weeks and it'll become a habit?
Yeah, I mean, behavior change is probably one of the most complex things in the world. And there's been a really robust study which kind of came out with this idea of 35 days to complete a habit, but the variance on any completion of automaticity is what we call it, varies from anything from like 3 days up into 150 days, depending on the complexity of the task. So when you're trying to engage in behavior change, be conscious that whatever the complexity of that task is going to also play an impact on how long it is going to take to become a habit.
What behaviours lead to human flourishing? We want to help people flourish and to excel. What behaviours help us to achieve that?
Yeah, well, I mean, even the idea of flourishing has just emerged, I suppose, in the last few years. There was a guy called Martin Seligman who published a really seminal book which founded a discipline called positive psychology. When we think about the discipline, psychology was always focused on deficit. It was always thinking about what was wrong with people, whereas Martin came along and founded positive psychology, which says, how do we play on human strengths? And therefore, how do we make people feel good? So flourishing came out as one of these concepts. I often try to put it into the different categories of what typically make us feel well. So how do you keep yourself physically well, mentally well, emotionally well, spiritually well, and financially well? So there's many ways in which one can change their behavior in all those domains. But really, I suppose, a wholly integrated, flourishing person is achieving well-being in all of those spaces.
Okay, so it's that kind of magic well-being jigsaw. Really, you look at all the different aspects of it and where your balance is in all of them.
Yeah, and that's a period of experimentation and finding what works for you. So Some people might need a higher level of physical activity, for example, in order to feel very high level of physical well-being. Mental well-being is how does one manage their attention, their fatigue, their cognition. Emotional well-being is obviously speaking to how people understand their emotions, how they're able to be emotionally granular, i.e. name their emotions and be able to understand how to process them and how to resolve any negative emotional experience. Spiritual well-being is probably the one which we are severely lacking in society now, through no fault of the lack of spiritual institutions that now exist within Irish society. But there is it's currently being rebranded under the auspice of finding meaning in the world. So when people find purpose and find meaning, they're finding spirituality and spiritual well-being. And then lastly, financial well-being, which is obviously if people feel a scarcity mindset, they're always going to be operating in a very amygdala form of the brain or fight or flight response, not giving them the time, I suppose, to be human.
Chat to me about agency and how people can reclaim it. What is it and how can people reclaim it?
Yeah, so agency is the idea that you have some sense of self-determination over your life, that you can decide, irrespective of all of the different things that are happening in your life, that you have control to a certain degree.
Yeah, it's ownership.
It's ownership, yeah. And it plays a lot on the discipline of stoicism, which a lot of us would have come across during the pandemic. What can we control? What can we influence? And what can't we control? And how does our psyche find the balance between those sort of different variables? So to gain agency, I always draw on this very robust psychological theory, which says that humans have three fundamental psychological needs, similar to how we need basic physiological needs to eat, to sleep, to procreate, all of these basic physiological needs. Humans need to feel like they're doing a good job, feel competent. They need to feel like they have control or autonomy over their time, and they need to feel connected to self, to others, or to something bigger than self. And so if you fulfill the fulfillment of those psychological needs, you get a level of agency over your life. Some of that can be done internally through reevaluation of your thinking processes, but that alone is not enough to think, sometimes people are stuck in dead-end jobs. People are stuck in, relationships that aren't working. And we must be having conversations around what can you change in your life as well to gain agency, and how do we empower people to do that?
Okay, so it's reviewing and looking at where you are currently at and then saying, how can I improve it and change?
Yeah, but I suppose it's a combination of both. What do I need to change in my own internal thinking about my life, but also, what is actually not just my thinking, what actually does need to change in order for me to gain agency. Not all of it, and this is where I often get frustrated with well-being, is that not all responsibility lies on the individual. There are very real environmental factors at play that impact people's health and well-being.
And of course, time is a big part of that. How can people create more time? Because time poorness is something we hear every day, all the time. But even with myself, when you meet new clients, I'm too busy, it's too hard. People are very time poor now, or they seem to be, and creating more time is really important.
Yeah, I mean, if we can find someone who can create more time, I think they're on to becoming a very wealthy person. But I mean, there's a really, I suppose, interesting understanding in actually how we've ended up where we are. Like pre-industrial era work was organized around very agricultural ways of working. People weren't stuck to a particular industrial clock. When we introduced the Industrial Revolution, people were forced into very mechanical ways of working, a 9-to-5 structure that often was incongruent with their basic biological processes. And we have not changed that model, despite the fact that we no longer are physically fatiguing ourselves like we were on service lines. We are working in a very cognitive and knowledge-based industry. And the reality is that people are experiencing an old model of work with a new faculty that is being used to engage with that work. Our brain fatigues at a much quicker rate than our muscles would do. And so people are experiencing burnout and that perception of time poverty as a result of that. Couple that with the fact that digitalization has made it basically impossible for people to segment parts of their lives. In the Industrial Revolution, at least, people clocked in, they clocked out, and they had, work, home, and probably church. Mm-hmm. Whereas now people just have work and
It's like the Mars bar. Every Dr. Eddie Murphy, anytime he talks to me, always mentions it. Work, rest, and play. That was an ad before your time, I'd say. But when I was like, was 10 or 12 or whatever, that was like their tagline: work, rest, and play. He said, like, the play is gone. We work, we rest, but the play bit is kind of missing in people's lives now.
Yeah, and that really feeds into kind of another theory of active recovery. So a German academic called Sonnentag says that humans engage effortfully in their work, and then they should be engaging in active recovery after that work. And part of that active recovery is the ability to psychologically detach from the work day. Those active recovery strategies tend to be something like engaging in sport, having, something to do, a hobby, something like that. Oftentimes people are not getting the opportunity to engage in those sort of activities anymore, or to the same extent, because work has become so demanding, because the third busiest time of the workday is now 10 p.m. And these are very harsh realities which are playing on people's recovery abilities. So if we really want to think about building high performance workers, it is very much stress plus rest, but we have completely skewed that equation at the moment.
Talk to me around environment design and how we harness that to make a difference.
Well, in a previous life, I ran an organization called 4-Day Week Global, and we were running trials across the world, understanding the relationship between reduced working time and its impact on human performance. And while as a concept you think, oh, it's great, people work less, everyone's going to be happier. Yes, absolutely, you'd be dead right. But Celsa Priest, when people are also happier, they tend to perform pretty well as well. So what we were finding essentially was a proof of concept that if we redesign the work day, for example, or the work week in a way that it marries with the way people actually are engaging in their work, giving them more time to rest and recover, they're showing up better in their work, but they're also having more time off to recover from that intense work. So that's a very simple way that we can be thinking around what does the future of work look like, being very conscious around how we use our time, thinking of it as a limited asset or a limited capital within your organization or within your life, and being very strategic about how you allocate that capital.
Chat to me around balancing stress then in a healthy way. So we've covered lots of different kind of aspects so far. Stress is something we all experience. We're all going to experience it. And sometimes stress is healthy if we balance it in a healthy way.
Yeah, I mean, we can't, again, survive without some form of stress. Otherwise, we'd be engaged in a constant state of hypoarousal, is what we'd say. We'd basically be like lying down all day. Stress engages our motivational faculties to be able to do things. So there's a very simple framework. It's called the Yerkes-Dodson's Law, which is what you're alluding to, Karl, that people need a certain amount of stress in order to get them up to a level of optimal performance. And then once they go over that, they end up degrading their performance and also impacting on their health. The problem is that we are operating in that overcompensation mode all of the time now. And in order to bring people back to centerfold, they must figure out rest and recovery as a key component. So it's good to be stressed, and it's good to experience a certain level of adrenaline and noradrenaline within the system. But when that shifts across to more chronic stress activation, which activates a different neurochemical called cortisol, that's when we end up in this perpetual state of anxiety, in depression. It impacts on our health in more ways than one. So chronic stress is a reality of today's working world. But we, again, can do small things to try bring ourselves back to agency.
One of the things people do is they'll use their phone as a method of de-stressing. Is that something that's stressing them out even more potentially? Yeah,
I mean, I think we are due a reckoning with digital in the next few years. I think we will look at it the way we've looked at smoking. I think that there is a very unhealthy relationship now forming with children and young adults and older adults when it comes to technology use. And I think when I think about addiction, if you're engaging in a behavior and it's making you feel good and you're getting enjoyment from it and you can put it down and still feel, I've got what I've needed from that activity, that's healthy. behavior engagement. If you're engaging in an activity and it's not actually giving you any satisfaction, you've entered into a different phase in your relationship with that behavior. And I think that's where a lot of us are operating when it comes to technology. We are using it, and we're using it in a very unhealthy way, in a way that's often making us unwell.
Because our doom scrolling is, we get very little from it, but we continue to do it.
Yeah, and I mean, these platforms are purposely set up in a way to be addictive. So, you know, I mentioned about the dopamine circuit. It loves that anticipation of reward. It's why when you are watching TikTok or a YouTube channel, they are already on Netflix. They're already gearing up the next activity for you.
The slider thing. Yeah, we watched was it Loch Ness last night? The mini series. It's really good.
Yeah,
like that. We stayed up, I'd say 2 hours, far too long.
Yeah. And that's because the brain doesn't actually fire dopamine when it gets the reward. It fires it in anticipation of the reward.
Okay.
You are stuck in a dopamine addiction then, because your environment or whatever it is that you're engaging in is rewarding that anticipation on, you know, a regular basis.
Chat to me around unprompted work and the fact that women tend to do more of it.
Yeah. So, you know, there was a mass introduction of women to the workplace in the 1950s, 60s, 70s. And that brought a huge swell in the GDP of every working nation. But there was a huge underbelly of society and the economy in what we call non-GDP labor. And that is the activities and the social contract that exists within society that keeps everything else running outside of work. So being able to pick up kids, being able to manage the household, being able to cook dinner, all of those sort of things. When we had 2 working parents then, that work still needed to be done. And that disproportionately, because of culture, has held and still been placed on women within society. And I actually observed this even before I knew a lot about this research when I was doing my PhD on surgeons. And I would constantly come up against this finding that female surgeons were more exhausted than their male colleagues.
Oh, yeah.
And it was always because they were expected not just to perform as good, if not better, than their male colleagues, but they had to go home and do a second shift at home where their male colleagues traditionally didn't. So there is that dynamic, and that's why women often experience higher levels of burnout and fatigue relative to male counterparts. There's also a lot of hormonal dynamics that influence on energy levels of women, which we don't factor into working life. There are certain parts of the menstrual cycle where women tend to have more energy and less energy. But again, we apply a very homogenous way of operating work. And lastly then, because women tend to be more emotionally intelligent on average, they tend to be able to pick up on a lot of the relational dynamics within workplaces that male colleagues might not traditionally have been able to pick up on. And so that means they are often left with the responsibility of managing a lot of that, which often doesn't lead to any sort of compensatory reward in a workplace. So until we start fundamentally rethinking what it means to be a good worker and to reward a lot of that very important part of work, we are dooming ourselves to rewarding outdated metrics of performance around money making or whatever it is, which is always going to be biased towards men.
Unpromoted work. I like that. A lot of listeners are going to go home now tonight with that. This is unpromoted work. We're going to split it. It's good.
Yeah.
When creating change for well-being, sometimes those behaviours can become addictive, even if they're good behaviours, can't they?
Yeah, I'm seeing it particularly in generations younger than I, who are on paper healthier. They are drinking less, they are smoking less, albeit vaping more, and on paper that sounds great. But I think a really unhealthy relationship is starting to form with things like exercise for younger generations in particular. I think that has been highly influenced by technology, where the ideal man or woman is completely skewed and distorted. And so there is a huge social pressure, I think, to look a certain way at a very young age, which I think must be so exhausting to be.
Oh yeah, growing up now must be absolutely exhausting.
Yeah. And so I think these people are, these young people who are very vulnerable, trying to find themselves, are investing all their time and energy into something very external, something extrinsically motivating. And really, one is never going to find happiness unless they can be intrinsically motivated to want to do something. So if you're exercising or you're engaging in any sort of healthy, quote unquote, behavior simply because of some extrinsic reason, it's not healthy.
Work-life balance, then. The one big mistake people make all the time when trying to strive for that. And we've seen that put in terms of post-COVID. We've got return to work going on. There's a big pushback, and in September, that's only going to get bigger. And work-life balance is what people are always striving for. What's the one big mistake that they get wrong?
I often don't think it's actually a failure of individuals as much as it's a failure of the system to understand that the system is not working for people. If work is being set up in such a way that people are exhausted at the end of the day, that people are struggling to be able to detach from their work and to engage in other parts of their lives, then that has to be a reflection on what the system is telling these people to do, and what it is signaling to them as acceptable and unacceptable when it comes to engaging in work. I think we've a really emerging toxic culture, particularly in digital formats, where people are perpetually on, yet maybe not necessarily always present. And to strive for work-life balance, I think, is it's like a fallacy. I don't think it's really ever existed, dare I say. So I think really it's about understanding what can you as an individual, again, gain agency over, but we have to start putting some responsibility on systems, on organizations, to be human-centered when they are designing policies around work-life balance. And I think a lot of organizations get away with saying that they have good work-life balance on paper, but that's not necessarily the lived experience of a lot of their workers.
Oh, there's a lot of food for thought in today's episode. Very serious, hard-hitting content. It's fascinating, though. It's very interesting. And the approach, the way you approach it, the way you look at it is balanced.
Thank you.
Tough in many regards, but balanced, which is brilliant. I always ask our guests if people want to find out more about you or about your content. Where can our listeners go to find you? Are you on Instagram?
I am on Instagram, but it's not necessarily a place. I actually don't have Instagram. I deleted it a year and a half ago off my phone. LinkedIn is the main platform in which I write on. And yes, I tend to be quite putting up thoughts like this quite a good.
Controversial on LinkedIn, one can only imagine.
Yeah.
Dr. Dale Whelehan, thank you so much for coming in. I really appreciate it. Great content. Folks, I really hope you enjoyed today's episode of Real Health with me, Karl Henry. As ever, you know where we are, at Karl Henry PT on Instagram, Real Health at independent.ie, and on the Irish Independent website. And we'll see you next week for more Real Health. Slán go fóill.